Hello and welcome to this episode of the Health Bridge podcast. I'm your host, Holly B. Today we have Natasha Trenev on the show with us. Natasha is known as the mother of probiotics. Her family introduced Bulgarian-style natural yogurt and kefir to the US market in the mid-1960s and 70s. She introduced the whole category of probiotic supplements in 1982 when she launched her company Natron Inc., which carries her precision probiotic products, which are unique and there really truly are no other similar products in the world. Her flagship is Healthy Trinity, and they have sold over 15 million products of this unique, powerful, and safe probiotic. Her company has an 80% retention rate of consumers, and in 44 years, they have no complaints of any kind lodged against them or their products. Not even one complaint with the Better Business Bureau. And her whole mission is that we need valid solutions to save people's lives. And there are too many companies selling completely worthless products in a time when we cannot afford it as a society. We can't afford to compromise our health. We need to do everything that we can right now to build up our immune system. It is extremely important, and that is her mission, which we'll get into in the conversation. This conversation is extremely important because your gut health is your health. No matter what it is that you are dealing with on your health journey, whether it's autoimmune, whether it's cancer, whether it's food intolerances, whether it's a mental health journey, everything comes back to the gut. Everything is supported by a healthy gut and let down by an unhealthy gut and left to flourish without a healthy gut. As I read in her bio, she literally brought the term probiotic to America. So when I say she is the mother of probiotics, I mean it is literally in her DNA. Her family history began in Yugoslavia, where for literal generations, they kept a yogurt culture alive, a kefir culture, and supplied their yogurts and kefir to the royal family. So not only does she have it in her family history, but she went on to study this in depth and create both the term probiotics as well as the standards in the industry. So we'll get into all of that, but some topics of note that we will be talking about is, of course, gut health, how to approach certain things like SIBO or leaky gut and rebuild your immune system that way. What does the immune system and the gut have to do with each other? What does your brain health and cognitive function and heart coherence have to do with your gut health and with your microbiome? And by the way, what is your microbiome? What is your gut flora? We get into those details, but we also talk a lot about industry standards and or lack of, as Natasha explains. So if you are taking probiotic supplements, take a look a little bit more in depth at the products that you're using and where you're getting them from, as she goes very into detail on why most products out there are really just throwing your money away and you don't really know what's inside of them. So if you are keeping an eye on your pocketbook, that is definitely something to consider if you think that this is an important purchase. We will go deep into Natasha's mission as well, which is ultimately spreading the word about the health of our children and how it's so important for our current generation to nurture the health of our kids. Because if we don't, things are already going downhill and we could take a very, very drastic turn in the near future, according to all of the research and data that Natasha refers to. So Get ready for this one. It's a lot of information, but it's information that you absolutely need to have moving forward. And also stay tuned because at the end, I will go over a really special deal and discount that Natasha and her company are offering to you, our listener. So, with that, let's dive in to this discussion with Natasha Trenev. Natasha, it is an honor to have you on the podcast today as you are the mother of probiotics. Welcome.
Thank you.
I think to explain your title, Mother of Probiotics, why don't we actually start with your story and your family history so people know why they can trust that you know what you're talking about when it comes to probiotics and how important they are.
Well, I've been in the health food industry for 60 years. I'm 77 years old. I've seen and heard everything. My family brought the concept of making natural Bulgarian style yogurt. We migrated into the 1950s, and my father actually started his business in the mid 1960s in Glendale, California. The name of the company was Continental Culture Specialists, and we were the first ones to introduce a real Bulgarian style yogurt. I don't think there's anything on the market even now. And we were the first ones to bring in a liquid acidophilus to the North American culture. I even worked with people such as Bernard Jensen when I was a very young woman, Adele Davis, some of the icons in this industry. And since I discovered that these products were having a profound effect on the people that came, sometimes church groups came to buy from us in caseloads. I said, wait a minute, there's something here that, I need to investigate. So I translated multiple articles that I received from the former Soviet Union, my intellectual exchange of me just sending regular books to them, nothing special. They just were hungry for information. And they would send me in critical articles in microfilm that I had translated. I had dozens of articles from US researchers, European researchers, and I said, wait a minute. All of this information out, and they're using so-called beneficial bacteria in the agriculture field for animals that they grow for profit. Why are they using this? So when I dug down, I found out that they wanted to keep their animals healthy because antibiotics just made them fat and not healthy. So they used antibiotics prophylactically, and that horrified me. But I said, these people are spending money to give these beneficial bacteria to their animals. Why aren't we doing this for human beings? And that started my quest. I was the original licensee of the University of Nebraska to represent their findings. And I was the first one to ever introduce a single strain Lactobacillus acidophilus called DDS1 in 1982. And nobody knew what the heck I was talking about because I decided to call the field probiotics because for 2 decades, people only knew about L. acidophilus. They didn't know anything about any other bacteria. And if a product didn't come up to be L. acidophilus, they wouldn't buy it. So I had to change that whole concept of people only wanting to buy Lactobacillus acidophilus. I do still sell a Lactobacillus acidophilus, a very good one that still has profound effect on human health. But I was the first one to introduce bifidobacteria to North America. North Americans didn't know anything about bifidobacteria, the importance of its benefit to the large intestine. I also introduced the very popular yogurt bacteria, Lactobacillus bulgaricus, who was the original longevity organism. So I did profound research. Unfortunately for everybody, my formulations are still unique. Nobody wants to do them. And then I found out serendipitously a couple of months ago that Natren, out of 50 manufacturers in North America and the EU, Natren is the only pharmaceutical grade manufacturer that's vertically integrated. Means we do everything in-house. And I'll tell you, producing true probiotics that first do no harm to the human host under any conditions have evolved with us as Homo sapiens and have been in the literature for more than 100 years. So I know the safety is impeccable. And the fact that we are experiencing chronic disease in North America, like never before in our history, where the last data I heard was 80% of adults chronically ill and on multiple medications, 60% of children chronically ill, 10,000 what I call adulterated ingredients or dangerous ingredients in our food, in our drink, in our water, in our soil, in our air. We have a nation on the brink of collapse, with the medical system and the chronically ill people and the chronically ill children that we're introducing. And unfortunately, and last thing to take a deep breath so you can ask me a question, was that, the autism rates are not getting better. We're still heading for 1 in 2 children in 5 years. That's 2030. 1 in 2 children in the United States will be diagnosed on the spectrum of autism. So we have a huge problem. And the fact that we have all these corrupt industries and nobody really is getting better in large numbers, we need to talk about this, and we need to come up with a strategy, and we need to know who's really stayed and who really wants to help, and which companies are just getting large amounts of money and developing marketing plans with millions of dollars behind them to sell you literally garbage.
I was sharing with you that I also have had years in the health food industry, working at an integrative pharmacy, working with supplements and vitamins. And I was there for maybe 6 or 7 years. And the amount of probiotics that were on the shelf when I started versus the amount that we had by the time I left, and this was over 10 years ago, probably, it probably doubled at least. And so maybe let's start here first with quality, because there's so many topics that I want to get into after what you just shared with us. But let's start with quality first, because you were talking about the quality of your own supplements versus other companies. And when you look at your supplement label, there are very few strains that you put in your capsules. And right now, if you were to walk into Whole Foods or any other health food store and you start looking at all the boxes, most of which are on the shelf versus in the fridge at this point, you're looking at 10, 20 or more strains listed on the bottle. One company in particular, which I won't name, I think was one of the first companies to start doing that, putting this like everything but the kitchen sink idea into supplement form. And that had always struck me as something I didn't know if I could trust, but I would love you to speak to that.
Yeah. Well, first I have to identify why I'm qualified to speak, because I've been, I said, part of this industry for 60 years, and I helped to restart an organization in the 1970s called the National Nutritional Foods Association, and had thousands of members in the 1980s. And so I was asked in 1986 to start working on the first set of standards of any kind for a dietary supplement in the industry. And that was by the manufacturers division of the NNFA. So I developed a probiotic labeling standard, which then thousands of members voted on, and it was accepted in July of 1989, only to be ignored the minute it got passed. And it was like I call an eyewash for the industry to feel better that they finally had some kind of a standard. Unfortunately, there's no money in following the standard, because virtually every other product on the shelf is in some point manufactured by a white label or a private label manufacturer. And the reason they put in all those strains in the products is not because of science, but because to the uninitiated public person, they put in the strains because that way they can make thousands upon thousands of private labels that to the uneducated looks like a different product, but in virtuality, they're all basically the same product. And the same formulation will appear on the shelf as they put in the refrigerator. They use plastic bottles, which I've told the industry in the 1980s they should get rid of all the plastic in their store and Unfortunately, I'm proven right now with the explosion of the problems with microplastics in the food and another cause of our disease. And so then again, I was approached in 1994 because the industry was trying to petition Congress to pass an amendment called the Deshay Amendment, which gave us the opportunity to make structure function claims. And I foolishly fell for it again. Oh, we're sorry, but we're going to implement the True Label program now. And can you come back and help us, write that standard and help us and overlook the Good Manufacturing Practices book that we want to read into congressional record? So once again, I did it again, took the probiotics standard that was voted on by the whole membership of the NNFA and submitted it, and it was finally read into congressional record. And because we promised Congress we were going to self-regulate, the Deshay Amendment was passed. And now here comes the tragedy. So for years, we tried to get people to join something called True Label. And I remember the first meeting we had with the science director, when we got the data in, we would take certain manufacturers' labels off the market in 5 different locations across the United States. And invariably, 80% of the products we tested did not meet their label declaration. And that's still true today, by the way. It's not just probiotics, it's across the board. And so the standards committee, which I sat on, would call in the manufacturer, not to hurt them, say, look, we're trying to get this True Label program started. We're having a problem. We're here to ask you for your cooperation. We're not trying to judge you. We just want to make sure that the tests are accurate. Can we see some of your tests? What are your procedures? Anyway, so a name that you would recognize in 10 seconds was one of the people that was called in, and we've tried repeatedly to find a test that could certify that they actually had these active ingredients in the product that were very expensive and people wanted. And unfortunately, when multiple tests failed, they withdrew their membership. And that caused a cascade of large manufacturers withdrawing their membership from the NNFA and actually put the organization under. It disappeared in about 2004. Which I think is the biggest tragedy that happened in this industry, because the only organization left became someone that was, pay to play to get legislation passed, but had nothing about standards or cleaning up the industry or even encouraging people not to order raw materials from Asia. See, what we do, we operate under international drug CGMPs, where we're required that we cannot use any ingredient until we quarantine it, have it tested by an outside laboratory to certify that, number one, it actually has the active ingredient that I'm paying for, and number two, it's not contaminated in any way. And so this is what everybody should be doing, because frankly, the stuff coming in from Asia would boggle your mind if you found out all the chemicals, the heavy metals, the rat feces, the hairs that are in some of those raw materials. It would just make you pop your eyes and say, my God, how can this be true? And since we do have this chronic illness, and I can just tell you, tens of thousands of articles now establish that all these diseases have a foundation in the gut, that those 100 trillion microbes that line our GI tract are responsible for every disease that ever happened in the body or will happen in the body. And what it is, we're throwing in worthless products with a lot of these so-called probiotics, because I introduced the whole term probiotics in 1982, and it's become so misused that I'm always horrified when people show me these products with just bacteria names that have no scientific validation, no concept of ever helping anybody. And so that's why I'm here, because the time is too serious. The need is very serious, and we need to get our act together. Otherwise, we're not going to have a population.
So let's dive into the microbiome. Can you give us a little bird's eye view, an overview of how the microbiome works and how it affects our immune system?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that the microbiome original term meant the sum of all the genetic material of the microbes in the GI tract, but somehow it was adopted to represent the microbiota, which are the actual organism that line the 27 feet of our GI tract. Okay. So what has happened systemically is that we've become a poor host for the safe and effective microbes that should be in our gut. And I can just tell you that when 3,000 stool samples were tested, less than 5% of the people had detectable bifidobacteria in their large intestine. That's a disaster. So without bifidobacteria in the large intestine, you basically don't have an immune system. And when you don't have an immune system, and since we know virtually every disease starts in the gut, all of these weak points that you have genetically, remember, your genes are just a blueprint. They get turned on by your thoughts, meaning your perception of reality, toxins in your food or water, anything that enters your body, and the toxins produced by bacteria or yeast in your body. Those are the only three things that can turn on your genetic material. And I think what's happening, because we've seen the destruction of what I call the optimal community of microbes and human beings, is why we're seeing an explosion, a literal explosion of deadly disease, not just chronic disease, but deadly disease. And since we are a hybrid of microbes and human cells, we better learn and not be just buying the latest thing we hear in a marketing plot to ingest in our body, especially when you put a living, smart, one brain cell, which is a bacteria or a yeast in your body.
So, which strains are we focusing on if we're talking about the overall optimal health to support our gut?
Right. Yeah, I've studied all the strains. I know the taxonomy, which is the identification. So, like I said, I've been in this industry for 60 years. So, what I found is that what I use, and I was the official licensee of the University of Nebraska in the late 1970s to represent the research in selecting super strains of the beneficial bacteria that really belong to us, that evolved with us and have been in the literature for over 100 years. When you're using live microbes, safety is the number one concern, and then efficacy. And most people don't even pay attention to that. They just put stuff in that may not kill you today, but you're going to have a problem maybe 5 or 10 years down the road. So the first organism I introduced was the Lactobacillus acidophilus, DDS1. And, acidophilus was the only organism recognized in the health food industry for 20 to 30 years, and the only organism that was accepted until I started introducing and talking about the bifidobacteria. So acidophilus has well over 10,000 research articles published around the world in every language. If you pick the right strain and know how to grow it, it has a profound effect on the absorption of your food, the breakdown of your food in the small intestine, the communication with the immune cells, and everything from helping you have beautiful natural skin to helping your female and male reproductive organs, to having an effect on every major organ in your body, including your skin. So it is an essential life-saving organism that should be handled by somebody who knows what the heck they're doing. And then the second microbe that I introduced was the Lactobacillus bulgaricus, which is in a product called Digestalac and also found in the Healthy Trinity. And that's the major organism used as a starter culture for yogurt. And it was studied by a famous Russian scientist who worked with Louis Pasteur at the turn of the 20th century, and is considered one of the true longevity organisms. And it is probably the most difficult organism to grow, stabilize, and get it into a form that will actually serve the human host. And so that was the second organism I chose to introduce as a single strain in its own growth medium, protected and given what it wants in order to be stimulated to grow inside of you and produce the benefits that we want. And so, as I said earlier, I was the first one to introduce bifidobacteria, which I found out through my studies of German literature and Japanese literature. And they considered bifidobacteria the most important beneficial bacteria to human health. And the reason being, it is particularly likes to live in the large intestine, which the colon is part of, because the large intestine has no oxygen.
Really quick, Holly B here. I just wanted to interrupt the podcast to ask you for a quick favor. Can you take just a moment to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you are listening in on? It makes a world of a difference. And the reach of this podcast, it takes like literally under 10 seconds. So go do that right now. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And now back to the episode.
And these bacteria are something we call obligate anaerobes. They only like to live in the presence of non-oxygenated environments. So, and this bifidobacteria is so important to our immune system because the large intestine is our waste and disposal system. It's the final part of our digestion and eliminating of toxins to preserve the liver from having to filter out more toxins than it absolutely needs to. So these are the three bacteria that I introduced first. And then I ultimately introduced something called Bifidobacterium infantis, which is the only bacteria that a healthy mother can pass on to its infant that will help to downregulate and upregulate the immune system and is specifically fed by a component of human breast milk to make it grow in a healthy infant. And 20-year-old data shows us that virtually no mothers in the United States, except maybe a small percentage, like 7%, can actually pass on Bifidobacterium infantis to the child, even if it's vaginally born and breastfed. So that means if you're not vaginally born and you're not breastfed, forget it. That's why we have this explosion of chronic disease in children we see today. And really, nobody talks about it. Nobody really understands it. And the information that's given is literally to treat symptoms, but there's not enough holistic information to really inform the parents what they need to do when they want to conceive a child, how their health needs to be affected while the child is, in utero growing, and when the child is delivered, what it needs to have in order to have a healthy and happy and safe life. And we've completely forgotten, or have chosen to forget, those natural things that used to make our population healthy and not have all these chronic illnesses that we have now.
And before we were recording, we were talking about the autism rates.
Yes.
And that goes right along with what you're just saying, right?
Yes. Autism is a multifaceted problem. And what it is that we have found that the health of the mother and the father, going back 3 generations, with a disturbed microbiome, and finally having a child with those disturbed microbiome in an environment that's highly toxic. And then this child who's not born with the proper immune defense, given vaccines that have carriers such as aluminum and mercury, which becomes a deadly problem to a child that the immune system cannot handle this. And so each child has a multiplicity of these factors that, then show up as what they call on the spectrum for autism. And the frightening thing is that with all these efforts and all these promises, we are still heading in 5 years, 2030, to have 1 in 2 children born in North America diagnosed with what they call on the spectrum of autism. This will destroy our society. Forget inflation, forget anything else, because the number I saw to deal with this crisis would cost us $17 trillion to deal with these poor, because now you're going to have one parent deal with this child that they cannot function.
Mm-hmm. So to turn the conversation towards what can we do about this? What can we do to improve health? We're going to start in our gut, right? So
Yep.
how can probiotics start to support that?
Well, the term probiotic, and I'm sorry to use this term, have been bastardized. It's a term that I brought, which means literally for life. And so we cannot just go on any probiotic because these companies that sell these products do not formulate, make them. And the science they use is the same model we've used in producing big pharma drugs in order to treat a symptom. True probiotic organisms should never be used to treat a symptom. They are there to give the body the tools to heal itself. So while the body is now optimally digesting, absorbing, and utilizing its food without making the immune system go crazy, it will naturally eliminate bloating, gas, constipation, diarrhea, autoimmune disease, the rest of the diseases, because it's working with all the facets of the body, continually giving it the tools to heal itself. So I'm not talking about healing or dealing with disease, because disease is complex. It's your perception of reality. It's also the 10,000 chemicals in our food, in our soil, in our water, in our air that is killing us. So we have to turn this around. I give anyone that comes to our website free of charge a low carbohydrate diet that I developed with a medical doctor 20 years ago. And it really eliminates all simple sugars and all simple carbs, makes you eat a clean diet. If you follow our protocol for the probiotics, by the way, I still have live people who will give you free consultations. We're not curing any diseases. We're just telling people how to give back the body the tools to heal itself, and for people to stop using all the hype and, going in these ridiculous cleanses that they're, throwing everything off their intestinal wall, thinking that they're going to get better. It's absurd. Or thinking they can get probiotics in a soda or, some food is beyond the pale. It's too serious of a situation for us to be taken in by what I call these cheap marketing gimmicks. We need to really know who's researching, who's formulating, who's actually manufacturing these probiotics. What do they know about them? And why are they putting them in a glass jar with a tin lid, sending it second-day air, thermally controlled? Because we want to incentivize the bacteria to serve us. They're not stupid. They're a lot smarter than we are. For us to assume they're going to mistreat them, have a marketing plan that they're going to adhere to, is sheer folly, because these bacteria will not function. They may be alive, but not active. And they may just choose to pass through our body and not do anything, because now we've really abused them before we introduce them into this very dynamic system which we have inside of our GI tract.
So it sounds like we are throwing so much of our money and energy away by taking products that just aren't living up to the claims.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And so if somebody is coming from, let's just say, an autoimmune condition, I myself have lupus. Most of my clients have other autoimmune conditions that they are working on getting into remission. Obviously, like you said, I'll reiterate, probiotics or taking these supplements don't cure anything, but we're looking at supporting our foundational health, and that begins in our gut. So where do you recommend that people start in adding these things into their regimen? And what else can you suggest?
Well, usually Americans want quick and easy. So I developed a product called Healthy Trinity, which I put in the 3 essential, most important species and strains of beneficial bacteria. One for the small intestine, one for the large intestine, and one for the transient flora. And again, you have to listen to your body. Some do very well with 1 capsule a day. Others may need 2, maybe 3. They have to change their diet. I tell them, alcohol is a substance made by yeast to kill bacteria. And I said, I'm not making a social commentary. I'm just telling you what I know. And, eating all these simple sugars is an addiction caused by the microbiome, which has bacteria or yeast that are punishing us by reducing the production of what I call feel-good chemicals in the gut that get sent to our first brain via the vagus nerve. And actually, they're the ones responsible for causing all these cravings that we have and ultimately developing these sensitivities where the immune system is now on the alert for things that it shouldn't be on the alert on. And actually, autoimmune disease is one thing. It's the body turning against the self because it can't isolate the true problem, period. So it's either bacteria that are misdirecting the immune system to attack the normal cellular structure of the body, or it's the bacteria or yeast producing a toxic agent that then destroys part of our body.
It's such a multifaceted thing, and yet it can be so simple
Yep.
in approach, right?
And Western medicine throws on these labels. And even when I go deal with doctors, I said, listen, a simple understanding of the whole digestive system should be taught from grammar school. The fact that the doctors are sort of indoctrinated to treat symptoms and not really look at the whole body and look at the literature that tells them that, oh, I've done a double-blind placebo-controlled, test, then I tell people that doesn't really count because each individual has a unique composition of microbiota like their fingerprint. So each person is individual. You have to use specific bacteria. And given the tools, the body absolutely has the ability to heal itself. We've just been brainwashed to think the body is defective, that it's no good. Actually, it's brilliant. And actually, your mind is a much better computer than the best computer you have out there. Actually, the AIs are pale comparisons to what our neural structure is in our brain and how it operates. So we've been sold these stories that we're defective, et cetera, but we can turn things around. We have to find out what foods genetically agree with us. And I can just tell you, the most horrific thing that was done in North America to make people hate milk and wheat, because those are the staples in healthy cultures around the world. And so in our culture, for people to become allergic to basics or what I call staples is horrific, because some of these things that people are eating now are not recognized by the body nutritionally to provide the same kind of nourishment to help rebuild the cells. Remember, each minute of the day, you lose 10 million cells, and they have to be reproduced with healthy proteins. If they're reproduced by cheap proteins, that causes disease. Your whole body is replaced every year. You have an opportunity to regain health within a year if you only understood this. But you can't understand this because the medical system is geared to run all these tests, get x-rays, get MRIs, get, T-scans, get everything, a blood test. Your body is defective. You need to take this drug for this symptom. You need to take that drug for that symptom. So by the time you're 50, you're lucky if you're not on 5 different medications. Now, I'm not telling anybody to do not what their doctor recommends. I'm just telling you that we need to be educated and we need to be making much more informed decisions when it comes to our health.
And I love that you said that we shouldn't, we're being sold these stories about what disease we have. And I'll just take lupus, for example. I've been sold the story that it's an incurable disease. I've stuck with this for the rest of my life. I can take medications, right? And that is pervasive throughout. I go into the lupus chats and stuff, and I see people get really upset and very defensive when anybody suggests anything otherwise. And want to share the news that no, there is so much that you can do to affect your situation. And you've mentioned a few times now, and I agree with you that so much of how our health presents is based on our perception of reality,
Mm-hmm.
how we are interpreting our situation. And so I'd like to suggest that by opening the mind and doing some shifts in your reality, shifts in your perspective of what your health situation is, that we can shift your outcome. And in addition to that, I think you mentioned three brains earlier. I'd love to dive into that just a little bit because what we're talking about is not just the gut brain connection, but also the gut heart brain connection.
Yes.
And understanding that these three things are so aligned with each other and
Mm-hmm.
that they each affect the other is hugely important in a health journey.
Absolutely. We are actually 96% electromagnetic entities. We're only 4% matter. So, there you go. That, we've been led on this journey that we are defective and things shouldn't be working. And actually, we're magnificent. The body is magnificent. And yes, the heart actually has its own neurons, and it actually has a greater magnetic field by 5,000% than the brain. The brain is really a hard drive. It receives all the information from the matrix. The matrix is where all of the information that we receive in our brain, and our heart actually is the one that gives us the straight answers, not the brain. So, if your heart tells you, when I test products, I put my hand over my heart, I put the product, the bottle in my hand, and I ask my heart, is this the right thing for me? And if you get to that point where you understand, you'll understand, first of all, who's telling you the truth. That's number one. We all have the capacity to know the truth when we hear it. Second of all, we certainly will know what products are good for us and what are not good for us. And if we become in tune that way, we become healthier, happier. And I tell people, we've been relegated to plastic buildings, to a plastic life, when our body really wants sunshine, earth, beautiful music, beautiful friendships. And the way, the social media is so destructive, especially to our young women. It's horrible what's happening. And 99% of them are very unhappy because they don't know about true friendship, true health, and how to really enjoy your life.
Do you believe that improving our gut function and our gut flora, that will create more mental health, more cognitive ability, and more heart connection?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's all intertwined. But if you want to strictly talk about the effect, 90% of your serotonin is produced in your gut and 50% of your dopamine. I'm sure anybody who's listened to lectures knows. And these neurotransmitters are then sent up our vagus nerve into our first brain. And those make us feel good. And also, the microbiota is responsible for producing precursors to GABA, tryptophan, and other feel-good chemicals. So when our brain is deprived of that, we get depressed, we get unhappy, because those chemicals are needed to make us feel satisfied and happy. And, yes, your perception of reality is the strongest, but I think none of us are really there when we can use our brain to control everything that's going on. We have to establish that optimal union with the bacteria because we're a hybrid. We are a hybrid of, bacterial cells and human cells. And we have to understand about that unity and that balance and stop the hype and, using literally garbage to try to deal with this magnificent machine we call the body.
Let's see. With the time we have left, there's still so much that I want to get into, but can we talk about some certain specific gut issues that are really common these days that people are struggling with, such as SIBO, such as low stomach acid, bloating, constipation, diarrhea. Can we just give our listeners some straightforward information on what's going on there and how they can help it?
Yeah. Well, look, first of all, we have to understand, again, we're given by Western medicine names, but we really don't understand what that is.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's look at our tube, 27 feet long, starting at the mouth and ending at the other end. So the whole purpose of this tube is to allow materials from the outside world inside of our own gut, okay, which then has to process this without allowing any of the bacteria that come in with the food, that's called background noise, to be killed efficiently by our stomach acid, so that, we don't have an overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine that then we just attach a nice name, SIBO, which stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. I think most people don't even know what it means. So basically, we're not taught sanitary conditions. We're not taught anymore in school or by our parents that everything in life comes with a background noise, meaning bacteria, especially in organic and raw foods that have to be washed thoroughly and chewed thoroughly and made sure that your body can deal with it before it can nourish it. So when these systems break down, when the stomach acid is not able to efficiently eliminate bacteria as the background noise in our food, these then bacteria, too much of them are allowed when the flap opens from the stomach into the small intestine to get into our small intestine. And since all bacteria are opportunistic by nature, they will start overgrowing if they're not met with adequate opposition. So the people who have the SIBO have been indulging in foods that have this background material, have not engaged in what I call proper sanitary conditions, and have now allowed these bacteria to grow in their small intestine. And so what I said from then on, you cannot have especially anything from a juice bar, because that's a disaster. Juice bars supposedly make healthy drinks, but nobody asks, how often these machines that make those juices are torn down and sanitized. According to the industry standard, those machines should be broken down every hour and sanitized, because once you break down the vegetable or the fruit, it becomes the perfect breeding ground for all the microbes that are in the air, because now they've lost their defenses because you've broken them down. Okay. So now you have this thing that's going to be attacked by trillions of bacteria. And you have no idea when you're consuming that 6 or 8 ounces of so-called green juice, what's in there besides the green juice. And that's, again, the ignorance of the people. Or if they're, not using proper sanitary conditions in their kitchen, people who put stuff close to their mouth, sometimes even their pets, because now we know that pets can transfer bacteria. So there is a multitude of reasons, maybe taking an antacid that stops the production of stomach acid that kills the bacteria that comes in our food. So these are just some of the multiple reasons you can have that small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So how do you get rid of it? Well, number one, you got to stop eating all raw foods, period. You have to start preparing food at home. You have to learn about basic sanitation in the kitchen. And you have to take our Megadophilus, which is the Lactobacillus acidophilus, and our Digestalac, which is the Lactobacillus bulgaricus, a half a teaspoon of each or more, because none of our bacteria are harmful, even if you took the whole bottle, before meals in lukewarm filtered water. And when you sit down, you have to consume, either very highly steamed vegetables or sauteed vegetables, grilled meats, nothing raw. And you have to eat slowly. You have to make sure your food is chewed at least 10 times before you swallow. And you take these bacterial supplements on a regular basis. And then I would also take one healthy trinity in the morning and one in the evening, because once you displace bacteria from one area, they will try to go in another area and set up house. So this is, again, something we're not taught, that we think, oh, we got rid of, the SIBO, or we got rid of H. pylori in the stomach. No, you have to make sure you make it undesirable for them to set up household anywhere else in your GI tract. And so this is just talking about SIBO.
Mm-hmm. And there's so many more. Leaky gut, which we know is rampant with autoimmune conditions, is another one. Is that also helped by taking probiotics and changing?
Leaky gut. Okay, so let's understand. So you have your intestinal wall, and you have trillions of bacteria on these parking spaces on your intestinal wall, which are called attachment sites. And there's something called tight junctures. There are little gates on the intestinal walls not to allow bacteria or yeast to enter your bloodstream, because the ultimate protection is to make sure that an organism that can harm you doesn't get a free ride in your bloodstream to go anywhere else in your body.
Hey, I just wanted to jump in here and interrupt the program for just a hot minute. You know that I'm so passionate about this podcast, but what I'm also really passionate about is helping women with lupus minimize their symptoms, boost their energy so that they can indulge in life again. So if you are a woman who is struggling with lupus, who is sick and tired of being sick and tired, who's struggling to manage your flares, if you're finding that your lupus symptoms are just really getting in the way of you being able to live your life the way you want to, I feel you. I've been there myself and I felt the same way. And what I've found is that there are a certain set of health fundamentals that, once applied, will support you in your foundational health. They will support you in building and maintaining that energy, minimizing flares, and allowing you to, again, indulge in life and follow your passions. So, if that is something that you are interested in creating for yourself, let's jump on a call together. I will walk you through the process that I use with my clients to get them from sick and tired to strong foundation of health by implementing my Health Bridge protocol. If this is something you're interested in chatting more about, I would love to talk to you. Apply for a free clarity call with me, and I look forward to getting to know you soon. And now back to the episode.
So what happens when these tight junctures are compromised by not so friendly bacteria or pathogenic bacteria or yeast spewing out chemicals to confuse the immune system, or using photon light emission to communicate to the immune system so it drops its guard. And then they're allowed to open up these tight junctures and get inside of the bloodstream. That's what then we term as leaky gut, and most people don't understand what a leaky gut is. So it means that large food particles that are aggravating the immune system are getting through these tight junctures, and they're getting a free ride in your bloodstream. In order to reverse this, because remember, every 3 days, new cells replace the cells that are one cell thick on the intestinal wall. So by getting the right bacteria into place, remember, the true probiotic bacteria have a vested interest in communicating with your immune system by photon light emission to make sure that only good-sized molecules of nourishment pass the intestinal wall and nothing else. Because your immune system is like a scanner. Anything that passes that gate, which we call the tight junctures, can create a food allergy, and that ultimately, leads to autoimmune disease, because the QR code is not accepted by the scanning immune system. Does that make sense?
It's a great analogy.
Well, I had to think about, how do I explain this to people? The immune system overreacts if something is not exactly what it deems safe for the body. And remember, the immune system routinely destroys cellular structure if it thinks it's defective, and then we call that inflammation. And people don't understand what inflammation is. And it's the immune system turned on hyperactivity, trying to control what it perceives to be defective human cells. And then you can have inflammation anywhere in the body because the immune system now is trying to defend the body by doing some damage in order to protect the survival of the body.
So by helping our gut with friendly foods, with very quality probiotics, we can slowly start to rebuild our gut health, rebuild our immune system, lower inflammation, basically help reestablish our physical health.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what it is. It's this a dance or communication with the immune system with the bacteria is extremely important because it's the cause of all disease. The hyperactivity of the immune system is caused by it not recognizing the right food particle or by being tricked by some pathogen producing chemicals to do something harmful to the body.
What I like to say with the way I describe autoimmune conditions, which you said in just with slightly different words, is that there's a incoherence. We've created an incoherence within the body, and we need to reestablish that communication system. And
Right.
so this is one of the most powerful ways to do that.
Yeah, if you had that in your computer program, you wouldn't be able to fulfill your function. It's the same thing. If we understood our body like we do our PCs or our iPhones, we'd be in much better shape. We wouldn't be sold all this garbage that it's worthless. And, look, it's really easy to regain health. I mean, I used to do whole broadcasts just teaching people how to chew food and swallow. Don't sit in front of a PC. Don't sit in front of your phone. Sit down at a table, listen to good music, have good company. Don't wolf down your food. Enjoy every morsel. Eat foods that you enjoy. Hopefully, they're not processed and laden with chemicals. And then I would just say avoid alcoholic beverages until your body gets better. Because alcohol, remember, is the compound that yeast organisms make to kill bacteria or to kill competition. So,
last question around food is, can't we just, because this is a question I would get when I was working at the pharmacy. Well, I eat yogurt, so I don't need probiotics. Is that valid enough, or can we get enough probiotics just by eating yogurt and maybe other fermented foods?
Yeah, that's another big. Well, I didn't tell you earlier, but in 1969, while I was still a student at UCLA, I set the yogurt standard in the state of California, which was then adopted by the USDA and the FDA. And there's a difference between something that we call starter cultures and organisms that must be taken separately because they would really create a terrible flavor or taste of the product if they were ever used to stimulate, or if they were induced to stimulate. Most organisms don't even bother fermenting stuff they don't like. So yogurt can only be made by a starter culture of Streptococcus thermophilus and Lactobacillus bulgaricus. People started throwing in things like acidophilus and God knows what else. And that should have been considered a contaminant because it's not a starter culture. It doesn't actually ferment the food that you want to eat. Okay. So people throw it on the label because, again, the ignorance. And people say, oh, I'm going to eat this yogurt. Well, you get virtually no acidophilus because in that situation, the L. acidophilus will be killed by the bulgaricus and not live even one colony forming unit to survive, to do you any good. So traditionally, yogurt is a source of starter cultures in small amounts that used to be good for us when we had a healthy society. Yogurt is a food to be eaten by people who are genuinely healthy or slightly problematically diseased, but not seriously diseased, as the only way to get the body better. It certainly should be taken by people who take their probiotics in the right fashion, the way I tell them about it, not just throwing any old bacteria, but it becomes a food with a potential to do better than just give you nourishment. But it's no longer a replacement for true probiotic therapy because of the condition of the human beings now in the United States that are 80% chronically ill.
Can we still utilize these fermented foods in addition to doing a therapeutic probiotic supplement?
Yeah. By the way, I also set the kefir standard in the state of New York in the late 1970s. And we introduced kefir to United States throughout the Dina dairy in the late 1960s, early 1970s. And again, these products are mislabeled. I advise people not to make stuff at home if you don't understand what you're doing, because you're probably growing something that's in the air rather than what you think you're growing. And that's what, keeps me up at night, because I have, I listened to these stories and I said, oh my God, what in the world are they consuming? So to get people off my back, I've actually produced a yogurt starter, which is not a big moneymaker for me, but I actually made a video that's available on our website, how to make your own homemade yogurt. And then you know exactly what you have in that yogurt. Or then I would just buy a plain yogurt of your choice that actually lists only the starter cultures in there and doesn't add all these what I call designer organisms, which don't survive anyway and might be a contaminant in the quality of the yogurt or the kefir that you're consuming.
Perfect. I know we are at time and I need to let you
I
go.
also want to say something very important. Please do not consume any kombucha. And I can't say this strongly enough. Americans have a tendency to take anything from another culture and overdo it. And
Yes.
kombucha is a natural medicine that is used judiciously. The word judiciously is important here, by families who have had this available for decades or centuries, and was used as a medicine. I'm going to repeat that, used as a medicine. We are now consuming large quantities of something that's fermented by a yeast that's also used to make beer, and an organism that produces cellulose. We have no idea what large quantities and consumption of this will do to the human being. It's the same warning I gave when people were going crazy in our country consuming soy milk. I said, listen, I look at the culture it comes from. In Japan, soy milk was, consumed 6 to 8 ounces as a treat once a week. It's the same thing with kombucha. It's a medicine. It was not even consumed once a week. It was only consumed and given by the family who know how to make it to people who had a problem, and it was only used for a short duration. It was not taken in pints or gallons like people do every day. I'm telling people, you have no idea what you're doing to your body. It is the worst thing you can do. It is not a health food. It's something that's going to give you the right probiotic. In fact, in my humble opinion, it is dangerous.
I will say that when I was working at the pharmacy and we had multiple fridges full of kombucha, they would sell out like crazy. And when we couldn't replenish them fast enough because we weren't getting them fast enough from the manufacturer to keep them stocked in the fridge, people would literally freak out on us. And I thought, that is not normal. That's like an addictive.
That's addictive.
behavior.
Yeah. It's like them showing up for their beer and you don't have their beer.
Yes.
Or you don't have
exactly.
their, wine or their favorite alcohol.
Right. And there's sugar in there. There's caffeine in there.
Oh, yeah. And then there's yeast. What do you think yeast wants? Sugar. And we have no idea what this bacteria can do. It's in there as a combination starter cultures. We don't have enough data. Excuse me.
With things like that, if somebody's going to consume them, I say say you buy it from the store in a 16-ounce jar, that jar should last you for a week. You should be taking it maybe an ounce at a time if you're looking for the health benefits, but you say
I
not
think
even that.
I think it should be dispensed by somebody who's had this in their family, whose family has dispensed it for the ailments. And I tell people what keeps me really up at night is these people trying to ferment this stuff at home and, transferring these Scooby, things from one family to the other. And I'm saying, have you guys lost your mind? You're dealing with intelligent entities that you're passing on. You have no cultural reference to it. You have no data. You have no idea how it should be treated, handled. And I said, it's like giving nitroglycerin to a 3-year-old and hoping it doesn't blow up the house.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, I was trained as an herbalist. I worked at the pharmacy with the herbs and supplements, but I've also taken a step back from that because my philosophy used to be how much of this stuff can I put in my body every day? Thinking the more the better. And I've completely reversed that to these things are medicine and they should be respected as such and treated as such and used as such.
Yeah, herbs are medicinal. They're not something you should be taking every day. It's the same thing with oregano oil. I love oregano oil, but it should not be taken every day.
No.
It's an antimicrobial, antifungal, and antiviral, and you just don't do that every day.
Yeah,
You
very
do it
potent.
as needed. And so, again, our culture, and I remember the urban myths that developed about this kombucha, and I kept telling people, listen, don't fool around with this. This comes from a specific cultural use with people who have generational knowledge on how to use this. You can't just adopt it and start taking it in large quantities and not think that there's going to be a problem. And there is already a problem because if we're having a problem with the spike protein, and on top of that, you're consuming a large amount of yeast, your immune system is going to be in big trouble, because now it's got too much of one thing and too much of the other, and it really doesn't know how to cope with it.
So chaos is going to ensue.
Mm-hmm.
And do you feel the same way? I can't remember if we mentioned this yet about kefir, store-bought kefir.
Oh, yeah. Kefir is a product that comes from the Caucasus Mountains. It's a combination of 2 lactobacilli and 1 yeast. And it has a specific flavor, and you have to know what you're doing because you're using a yeast. And I just tell people, look, at this time in our society, I would not take a kefir because it has that yeast. And I tell people, avoid yeast right now because we have a health crisis. And yeast is, remember, a more complex organism than a bacteria. It's very similar to our cellular structure. So that's why when you take an antifungal prescription drug, it can be harmful to the body because in order to destroy the yeast, it may damage the liver cells and other cells in our body. And this is what people need to know, that the last thing you want to fool around with is something that has yeast in it.
On that note, I think that's a great place to end. Are there any last thoughts that you have for our listeners or any last reiteration of your mission and the work that you're doing now?
Yeah. My mission is that we need to listen to people who have a history of knowledge and are specific in their field. I don't have 150 SKUs. I have less than 20. Probiotics is like telling me that everybody's producing the space shuttle. They're not. And, we have to learn to go back to the basics. I'm like a dinosaur. There's very few of me left. And we have to decide what kind of society we want. Who are we going to listen to? Because so far we've listened to a lot of people, and those lot of people have not gotten us better. They've gotten a few people better, but the majority of the people have not gotten better. And so I'm saying that I invite people to go to my website. I don't know how much longer I'm going to be around. I'm in pretty good health for 77. But I'm just saying to people, it's up to you. You are responsible. You are the captain of your health. You are the captain of that ship. And, listening to people who only have bits of information and are using very sophisticated language to convince you that they really know what the heck they're talking about, where has that gotten us? Not gotten us to a better place. We have a very compromised country. We have ill children, and we have to make radical shifts in our thinking and behavior in order to turn this around.
Natasha, it's been an absolute honor speaking with you today. I will outline, once we stop recording here, for our listeners the generous offer that you are giving them. So I want to thank you for that. And again, just thank you so much for sharing the knowledge that you have. And I will ask our listeners to please share this episode with anyone you love, because this is information that everybody needs.
Absolutely. And it's not because it's coming from me, but because, you acquire a lot of information if you've been around for 6 decades. I'm almost seen and heard everything. And I see what's going on, and it's not good. Even though these people are very knowledgeable, and I think a lot of them mean well, but we're not seeing a radical turnaround of this chronic illness. In fact, I'm seeing it worse every day. So, we have to stop and think, what's the issue here, and how can I really get better?
Natasha, thank you so much. I will direct our listeners to your website for more information and to take advantage of that offer. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So this conversation might have been a bit heavier than you were expecting, right? Maybe you're expecting a little bit of a lighter conversation about all the friendly gut bacteria and all the stuff that we want to get rid of, and pop this probiotic or eat this food and everything's going to be okay. Well, unfortunately, that's not necessarily the case, in that there are many layers to these issues, and Natasha is approaching this truly from a worldview. She is seeing the overall bird's eye view of the impact of having disrupted our healthy guts and our immune systems through, as she said, toxins in our air, food, water, supplements that aren't doing any good, stress, mental turmoil. All of the things that are going on in society today are affecting us at that root gut level. And we are seeing really negative trends in health, in autoimmune diseases, in autism, and everything in between. So I really hope that you can take this message that Natasha brought to us as seriously as she delivered it, and start with yourself and your family. So in my whole personal growth journey, which is closely intertwined with my health journey, I had a realization that if I wanted to affect any change outside of me, in my family unit, in my community at large, as well as nationwide or larger, nothing was going to happen if I didn't start with myself first. And I think that's where we're at with our physical health and with this discussion, is that we need to focus on ourselves first, right? We need to put the oxygen mask on ourselves first, and then we put it on our children or the elderly or anybody that needs our help. So what is one small change that you can start with when it comes to affecting your gut health? Well, I would say, honestly, start with Natasha's products. She's so concerned with getting the word out there about the declining health of our nation that she wants to make her products as accessible as possible for everyone that hears her message. And so they put together a special bundle for you, our listeners. It's called the Beck Show Bundle. And I will put the link in the show notes for you. But this bundle is going to include their signature product, the Healthy Trinity 90 capsule bottle, normal price $159.95, plus a free bottle of the Healthy Trinity 14 count bottle, which is normally $36, and a free downloadable book called The Power of Probiotics, The Secret to Great Health by Natasha herself. And that's normally a $20 book. So the bundle package value is $215 and change. They are giving it to you for what I think is 30% off, perhaps. I don't know if I'm doing my math right, but the total price is going to be only $117.95 before tax. They have an additional code to offer 25% off other products as well. So I'm going to link that in the show notes. I think this is the perfect way for you to start and try her products out for yourself. As she said, they have resources on the website, some for free, or many for free, actually, and they do consultations as well. So you can get some assistance in figuring out what product might be the best for you to start with. So I ask, as I did in the episode, please share this episode with someone that you love and care about. And let's spread the word. This topic is extremely important, and especially now, especially at this time. So please help us spread the word. Like, comment, follow, subscribe to this podcast to help get our word out even further. I really appreciate you listening. I really appreciate your interest in up-leveling your own health journey. I know that's why you're here, and I would love to learn more about your health journey and what you are going through, whether it's lupus or any other health condition. Go ahead and get on my calendar. I'd love to chat with you just a quick 10 minutes so I can get to know what it is that you're struggling with and what your goals are for your health. So find that link in the show notes, and we will see you next time on the next episode of the Health Bridge podcast.